Here we go.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to our session for Open Education Week brought to you by Tennessee's Textbook Affordability Task Force. Um, we've got a session here. We've got a couple presenters, but I will just give you a few really quick housekeeping notes. Um, Rachel, I think I might need you to advance the slide if we want to look at whoever's in control there. So this is OER week. We're here on Tuesday, and we've got sessions lined up for the rest of the week. And we've also got the sessions that we've already done have been programmed, so those are going to be available for everyone. I'll just remind you that this session is being recorded and will be shared with registrants and posted to the web. And participants are muted on entry and will remain muted throughout the session to reduce background noise. So I may mute you if we get some background noise there. If you have questions throughout the session, you can submit them through the chat feature, and the presenters or myself will pass those on to the presenters and they can address those. So we'll get started. We have today a session entitled "A Team Approach to Open Pedagogy Through High Impact
That's not
Practices."
us, Phil.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Excuse me. Adapting Open Textbooks for Tennessee's Pre-Service Teachers, that's the one. And we have with us Dr. Meece, DR Meece, Professor of Education at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and Rachel Fleming, the Scholarly Communications Librarian, also at UT Chattanooga and organizer of OER Week here. So I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Well, welcome and thank you for everyone who's here or watching later. Just as a little bit of introduction to this session, I wanted to put this session together with Dr. Meece because authoring or adapting open textbooks or OER can be maybe the more intimidating cousin to just adopting them into your courses. So I wanted to have a nice chat with Dr. Meece about what his experience was doing this work for his own classes. But I do have a lot of notes, so it's maybe more of a structured interview. I don't know if you have methodological approaches. So, but we have a small group, so we can do this pretty casually. If you have a question and you want to jump in while we're chatting, I think we would be able to accommodate that.
Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate at all. Just jump in the conversation.
Yeah, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat, whatever you like. So, and I've made some slides just so you can choose whether you want to look at our faces or look at a picture.
I loved your font on that first slide, by the way. That was really cool.
Thank you. Well, we met in 2018 when you applied for an Affordable Course Materials Initiative grant, our grants at UTC, about your child development course. And I remember from the very beginning, you were interested in developing your own materials for that course. What was pushing you in that direction?
That's a great question, Rachel. Before I answer it, let me say thanks to everybody that's here because I really appreciate this time to talk to everybody. And I had to put that in there first because I'm afraid the way I'm going to answer this question is kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. So I'm going to thank everybody first. A child development course is something I really love to teach. I've taught it or taught a child development course probably the last 20 years. And there are child development courses pretty much at any university, any college, any community college. Sometimes they're in child and family studies. Sometimes they're in a school of education like ours is. Psychology departments. They can be in some campuses, there's more than one child development class. And so that means there are a lot of child development textbooks on the market. All the major publishers have several of them. I've read a bunch of them. They're usually about $150 or so. And they do that thing where every couple of years they come out with a new edition. And They'll pair in, like you can get your students the Zoom plugins or the Canvas test taker or the online book with videos, all that's kind of all these great things. But if you look at those books, there's a lot of differences in there, and this is where the weeds come in. So our class is mostly for students who are pre-K 3 or K through 5 teaching licensure students, or special ed students, some K through 12, but mostly that early childhood or elementary school group, or child and family studies students who are also taking another class in adolescence, or occasionally a nursing student, social work, psychology students. But it's really designed with the first thought being meeting the licensure requirements of those education students. So for that reason, our class is really based on prenatal, birth, through about the transition to middle school. So about adolescent time. And so we don't really focus on the adolescent years in our child development class here. There's another class in adolescence that's taken by students getting high school or middle school licensure. If you look at the textbooks in child development, a lot of them are prenatal, birth through adolescence. Of course, there's some life course human development, but the majority, I would say, are through adolescent times. And there's two main kinds. Some focus more on topics like here's social development, here's learning to read, here's uh, learning to use language. Others focus really chronologically. Let's start with babies, and in a few weeks we'll talk about preschoolers, and in a few weeks we'll talk about middle childhood. And there are some textbooks available that really only go through middle childhood, like our course, but they're mostly those chronological texts. They just kind of take out the adolescent chapters and repackage it as another book. Um, and I always hated buying that $150 book and not using 3 or 4 chapters. So I would always not get that adolescent section in our class. But what I really wanted was a class that was topical through middle childhood, and that didn't really exist. And there's other things too. Some classes, some books are more psychology, some are more education, so some are more applied, some are more research, some are more biology, and some are more uh, culture. I wanted a book that was topical through middle childhood, really more on the culture side, but had biology in it, looked at it as interactive, that had a developmentally appropriate approach. And that just was something that didn't exist. But that's the way I taught the class. And so I had for tried all kinds of different things. I would go to the where you can take the textbooks and rearrange them from the publishers and come up with your custom ones. And I'd done that, a couple of different versions of that. I was never really entirely happy. And I knew that someday I was going to have to write the book that I wanted for this class. It's just that's a pretty daunting thing. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of one of those amorphous things that you don't know exactly how to get started or how to do. And so that's about when I came to you, because I was like, all right, I know this is what I've gotten to the point now. I've known I'm going to have to do this for a while. I've gotten to the point now where I'm just going to do it. So give me some help. And so you pointed me in some directions there, and it helped.
Did. And you mentioned probably the biggest early barrier, which is you kind of don't know how to get started,
Right. Right.
right? Um, and and
And
when what were there any other early barriers, like things
well,
that were tripping you
you
up?
know, just kind of I I had gotten some like solicitations from minor publishers, right? But it just seemed like a whole lot of hoopla. Does that make sense? Like put together a proposal and we'll do
Hmm.
this and we'll look at the other things and we'll get a focus and it just and I've reviewed text for publishers, so I kind of had some glimpse into that process, right? And it wasn't just not knowing where to begin. It was like, gosh, there's a lot of hoops to go through.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? And
That
so
does
then
make sense.
it's like I don't know if I want to put my time into that because I don't know where it's going to end up. I don't know if if it's going to pay off. And so we only have, we all these academics on here know we only have so much time, and we never have quite as much as we'd like.
For
So that was
sure.
one of the tough things.
So that summer, after we first met, I saw the announcement for this first two in the now series of early childhood education texts from the College of the Canyons in California. And I mean, immediately forwarded these to you
Yeah.
because it seemed like this is going to jumpstart that whole process. And just I want to make sure we shout out Jennifer Paris and her team over there who have been working on these materials.
Jennifer Paris became my Gmail buddy because they have like a Gmail site for these texts, and yeah, they've really done some remarkable things in California.
Yeah,
I
and I
don't know if
believe
you,
that these are supported by some state level funding as well, which is
yeah. So
something that I'm not able to offer you.
so what they have, the 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 university system in California, they're 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 really into, because population, so
Mhm.
they're really into trying to direct students to community college and then up to the 4-year schools. And so in the community college system, it's a pretty well organized system, and they put out this grant so that they could have common textbooks in all their community colleges. And so College of the Canyons, uh, they worked on the early childhood piece. And so in their community college system, they have several classes about that really focus on early childhood education, because you can get a 2-year kind of certification in early childhood. So they could be used either as a sort of standalone or to transition into those 4-year schools. So they've been building their catalog of their.
Yeah. Yeah. And my first thought was, having this core of openly licensed material that you were free to use and change and put into whatever framework you had in mind for your class that was going to help jumpstart your creation process.
And it really did. The that book that you just showed, remember, and I was saying I wanted a topical book. Well, their book's chronological, and so it was like, that's not exactly what I wanted, but it gave a lot of resources and ideas, right? So
Mhm,
it gave, like, I see your picture now is planting some seeds, and so yeah, it was like a fertilizer, like a medium, right?
mhm. And I think that's, I mean, the case when we're thinking about adapting text is like having some source material that is almost on the way to what you're wanting, something that's really customized to your course,
Hmm.
having most of that work done and being able to add to that kind of corpus of work is what we're doing in the spirit of openness.
Right. So I can say that in a couple of ways, Rachel. You remember I said that I had played with sort of reorganizing textbooks and making those
Hmm.
from the publishers. Well, what you can do there is you can kind of rearrange the chapters, right? So I could drop out a chapter on adolescence because I wasn't going to use it. But what I could do with that College of the Canyon book is I could take a few paragraphs about Freud out of that chapter and put it in a different chapter. You see? And
Hmm.
so then, and I can I can tell everybody kind of the process that I used to do this. I had a semester's worth of PowerPoints that I used, that had just built up over time, that had become what I want, the order of how I wanted to teach things, and I converted those all to text. So I just sort of printed them out as text, and those became the subject heads. And so I made each week's lectures a chapter, because that made sense to me. And so I took those PowerPoint sort of templates of, here are the chapter heads. And if there was something already written in that open source book, well, I don't have to write this thing about Freud again. I can cite them for it, and I put it in there. But if there was something that wasn't in there, like I really wanted this whole thing embedded in developmentally appropriate practice, well, that told me what to really focus on and write and come up with for myself. And so it it became a way of sort of starting with a skeleton and fleshing it out. And so sometimes I had all this almost boilerplate things that I could stick right in there. And other times, well, that didn't exist yet, but
Mhm.
it's not like coming up with a whole book from scratch.
Right.
Right.
So this a less heavy lift.
Right. And the parts that I spent more time on doing myself were the parts that I really wanted to spend more time on to doing myself, and
Right.
not the stuff that's been written 1,000 times,
Right.
right?
Right.
So so it really helped. And I love this idea of open source and being able to remix things and make it how you want it. I can tell people that teach classes that was one of the most, I'm like that second stage career person now. I'm in my 50s, right? That was incredibly rejuvenating. That was incredibly intellectually stimulating to be able to make it just how you wanted it to be.
Yeah, that's something that we've heard in already in the presentations this week is that it's not, well, it is about saving students money.
It
That's a
is.
big part of it, but it really is also about pedagogy and being
Right.
connected with your classes. And like when you create a resource that's customized for your classes, the book is serving the class. You're not
Right.
structuring your class because a book is structured a certain way. You're doing what you want as an instructor.
And I should throw in another little piece here too. In classes like this, I have a certain responsibility because I know a lot of those students are teachers, probably
Hmm.
2/3 of them, or they're going to be teachers. And that way, I know that they're going to take tests for licensure. And I know that there's a certain chunk of those tests are about child development knowledge, right? And so I know that there are certain things that they've got to have because they're going to take a test on it later. And so I couldn't be just completely willy-nilly. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I had to I had to have sort of an end goal in mind, or at least some end post.
Yeah. Um, so you created the first one, this child development text, developmentally appropriate practice, and you just finished in the fall. Also, another adaptation of the early childhood curriculum, the strategies for early learners. That's what we call our course, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So I can tell you a little bit about that. So what you see on the left there is that's if you so I thought that students would really want to have the option of not having just something online. Okay. So when I first started with that child development book and I was looking at the existing materials and I was looking at that book from the College of the Canyons, what I had in mind was like you take my LMS and we just switched to Canvas, or we were in it not that recently. And I thought of it as I'm going to embed this into the LMS. I'm going to make this seamless. It's going to be like each module for each week will have HTML files that are the text with pictures and videos embedded in there. And I really thought of it as being just HTML, right? Just flowing through that. And I thought, well, students are really going to want to be able to print this out. And Amazon lets you do like a print on demand book that's basically just the cost of printing it and the postage.
mhm.
So for like 20-25 bucks, they could order like a real looking textbook. And I thought, well, that's important because some of these students are going to want this to have for their test, and some people just don't like looking at the screen. It wasn't that important. I told you, Rachel, that
Yeah.
like out of 150 students or so a semester, like 6 or so buy the book.
Hmm.
Free is better than cheap. Okay. And so that's what I learned there. So when I did this the second time for my strategies of early learners course, now this class is a little more, it's a little smaller, quite a bit smaller. So from 150 students to 20 or 30 students a semester. Okay. And from all those different licensure areas and different majors, it's just students who are pre-K through special ed.
Hmm.
Okay. So these are folks who are going to work with toddlers, preschoolers, 4-year-olds, kindergartners, and first, second, and third graders. And this class is really focused on pre-KK. Okay. And so it had a much tighter audience, I guess. And so what I did was, when remember when you showed those College of the Canyons, they had a book there about curriculum in early childhood.
Right.
Well, that kind of served the same role. I knew what topics I wanted to teach, and they had a book that had several of them in there, but they had really written their book based on California. I just remember this old Soundgarden song, which was something like, "I'm looking California, but I'm feeling Minnesota." Well, I was feeling Tennessee, right? I couldn't, my students would be like, "Why are we reading all this stuff about California
Absolutely.
curriculum? Because we're not going to work in California." So what I was able to do was to take some of their pieces, but merge it with our Tennessee state curriculum, which was a little different than the California curriculum. So in each unit, I could say, here are the Tennessee curriculum. And I'm not going to lie to you, they borrowed a lot of stuff too. And so there's like whole chunks about Australia in there, right? And so it's just but the basis of the content
Hmm.
is the same.
Right.
So whether it was how kids read coming from Australia through California, and now let's look at it in Tennessee with our Tennessee standards. uh, it was I told you this. This was like, it's like if my son had a Harry Potter Lego set, and my daughter had a Star Wars Lego set, and we all decided to make like a Mandalorian castle, and we'd use some of these pieces and some of those pieces, and there's that one really cool piece from the Lord of the Rings set. And so this one was a lot more like building with Legos. It was more like putting things together. And they were and this was also a place where I had stuff that I had written, I'd presented at
Hmm.
conferences. um, I, I have a little journal article that people are always downloading from a journal called Young Children, and I could take these little things and put them where they belong because they were mine. And so there were just these little building blocks, right? And it was
Hmm.
it was it was as much constructing as it was writing. And this one was a lot of fun. And what I did very differently is I didn't start off with HTML and then try to figure out how to format it as a book, which was
Hmm.
kind of the stupidest thing I did. I just started with the book format, and then each chapter or weekly unit printed it as a PDF for them, because they're going to look at it that way anyway. They would just assume, they would probably rather look at the PDF than look at the Canvas page. That was something I learned by doing it. Um, so don't make it overly hard on yourself, right?
Hmm.
Just
So,
stick with the formatting, you know.
so when you did both of those adaptations, you were working with a novel strategy to make sure that you had your work completed. You went ahead and didn't have a book for your class, so you had to complete your revisions by the time you got to them in your class for the fall.
Well, I did this because I'll be honest with everybody right here. This is not easy. Okay, I'm sitting here talking about playing with Legos, but it's really a lot of work, and it's kind of uh right, and you got all this other stuff going on. And so the way I made myself do it, and I even did a little tighter the second time, is I didn't order a book for the class, and so I had to have it. And so there were times with that strategies of Royal Olympus book, I was really like a week or two ahead of them, um, because by about the middle of the semester, I'm like, okay, this is how kids learn to do math, and I'm trying to put that together. And that was a pretty tough semester, actually, to be honest. But I didn't want to, like, I wanted to have something that would force me to do it, right?
Mhm.
Something that would make me have that goal. I don't know if everybody works that way. I don't know if you want to go without a net, but um,
But a publisher, if you had gone a more traditional route, a publisher would have given you a deadline
they're
as
giving me
well. So,
deadlines, right? And those aren't. I don't know.
So
To me, I was really motivated by this, by wanting to make sure the students learn, right?
yeah,
That
so
was
there's
just
a
something that
question from
was,
the chat that says, how much actual time involved? Do you have any sense of how much time you spent um,
hmm.
doing your writing? Or
Well, I started that first child development book in a summer, and I spent a whole lot of that summer doing that. It wasn't the only thing I did, I had a week or so where I went to summer camp and those kinds of things, but it was pretty much my summer job. And then I was still doing it that fall, right? And so that fall, I didn't have a textbook in that child development class, and I told you I was doing this in the LMS. And so I was, by the time that fall semester was done, I had the book done for the January semester that they could order it from Amazon. So a summer, a hard summer, and a lot of fall. And that was to get kind of a rough draft, right? And that was the other thing. I was honest with the students, as I was like, I'm doing this as like, oh, there's going to be errors, and not errors, but spelling and formatting and those kinds of things. And so I wanted it to look halfway polished by the time the spring came, and then by the next summer is when I started on the next one. So a year, a year. The other thing that happened with the first child development course that I didn't really do with the second one is quality matters, because I was writing it as the HTML. And
Mhm.
I guess y'all know what quality matters is. That's the online teaching kind of thing where they, um,
It's a certification for online courses
yeah,
for
yeah. And so
quality and
you
accessibility.
have
So,
three reviewers that go into your course, and so there was a lot of that too, which
mhm,
was, and in some ways the structure of that really helped me with that too, because it's really heavily based on having weekly objectives that go into your overall course objectives. And so that, when I started with that book, I already had that in my mind that I was going to do the quality matters, and so I really based it. I said I kind of started with those PowerPoints. Well, I started on here's those objectives from each
mhm.
PowerPoint week, and so that really gave a lot of the structure there. But that process of going through the quality matters was a part of it too. So in a way, that was kind of organic. It was the biggest job I was doing at the time, you know.
So looking back at your both of your revisions, what are some of the most important lessons that you learned from
Mm.
writing those or adapting those two books?
Well, I learned a couple of things. One, have good, if you can, and you may not be able to, but if you can, have some communication with the people that are working on their version, or the thing you're remixing, because
Mm.
that's kind of cool. Two, find somebody like Rachel, because you may not have just one source thing, right? You may have multiple. I think I put in one of these two books, I don't even remember which one it was. I put like a paragraph or two from Wikipedia in it and cited it because I just didn't want to write the thing, right? And it already existed. And there was
Sure.
something from 0 to 3. So you may have multiple sources of stuff you didn't even really think about yet. Okay, that is out there that's open source. So
Hmm.
I said 0 to 3. So there's an agency there that's published stuff that says, hey, you can use our things because we promote early learning. The government. So
Hmm.
I've got some growth charts from the CDC. Well, they're like, as long as you cite it, that's great. That's why
Yep.
we make it. And so, but that's really cool for students to have right there in their book. So and in different fields that's going to be different, but there are probably more of a variety of sources than you realize right now.
Right. So, like with the adaptation, it's not just the one book that you're changing, but
Right.
you want to look at all
that
what's
other get the
available.
minifigures out of that set of Legos and play with them in here, right?
Exactly.
And so, and another thing I learned, well, I kind of went through this one, was not to make it too hard on yourself. When I went through and trying to make it as web pages and HTML, and I should have just made it as a book. The other thing I really learned I did different the second time is when I was working on that first child development book. I think it was probably because I started with my own PowerPoints and I was really just fleshing it out. So if something fit there, I put it. If it didn't, I made it. And I didn't do a good job of really thinking of, oh, I'm adapting this book. And so I
Hmm.
didn't do a good job of writing a change log of what this book is. The second one, I did more of that. And so I wrote it as units, like a chapter. And so after each chapter, I would say, okay, most of this came from this College of the Canyons book, this part, this part, this part, but I wrote that part. And this part was from a conference thing I did. And this other part was from, um, the government or whatever. Right. And so I would just say, these are the things I added, these are the things I changed. Um, and I think that's a really good practice, because when you want to be able, when you get that Creative Commons license, to
Hmm.
say, hey, I'm using everything I'm using here. And so I did a really more tight job, not just at the end of recapping, but in each section of putting, I use footnotes of saying, this is where this came from, this is where this came from.
Hmm.
And the reason I use footnotes is because that's where they had done, right? And that's where they had traced that this was from Australia or this was from wherever. And so I followed that procedure. And so it almost become, okay, this is kind of an esoteric reference, but if you look at software like Linux and stuff, you can,
Hmm.
people will branch off and make new versions of it, and they'll say, okay, this is where we diverge. This is where their branch off is. But now somebody else may take that divergent part and make something new out of it, right? They
Hmm.
might just use this part of the code. And so that becomes what in software they call a change log,
Yeah.
right? That this is what that is.
In on the Creative Commons, their wiki, they have some kind of best practices for notating adaptations. So this photo I didn't change a lot, but if I maybe turned up the contrast, I would say like, here's this, and well, I wouldn't be able to because this is a no derivatives photo, but I would want to say, oh, it's this photo, but I turned up the contrast. And that's kind of what you did with the text. Say, I used this, but I put in this other section.
What is that?
Um,
Is it beans?
I was trying to figure that out too, but there's also
There's a couple of questions here in the
questions that
chat.
have come
Yeah.
in. If you can see
Okay.
the chat and have
That's
a moment
tomatoes.
to adjust those.
Um,
Let's see.
so one is about when you built your child development text inside of Canvas. Did you end up? You did kind of both of these things. Did you come up with one document by the end, or did you build the text and resources per module?
Hmm. Let me read that question so I can understand it better. Did you come up with one document by the end, or did you? Okay, this is what I did, Anna. I did it by module, okay, and then I said, okay, they should be able to print this out. And so I was looking at a way that they could print it out easily. And I saw that Amazon had this kind of publishing thing where they'll deliver it. And they had a template for what, basically a doc file for what the book is. Well, at that point, I took their template of their doc file and I went back to each one of those units in a module and I put them back in there. Does that answer your question, Anna? I could show you if you.
I'm going to talk for a minute. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I guess really what I'm asking is, what do
I'm
the
using.
students see? Do they see, like, built into Canvas is the text, and then there's a video that's been embedded and all that, and then how do you record that to be able to share it with other groups,
Right.
do you have links to your external resources, any kind of videos and things like that? Or did you just do text? And so it really could be a nice document at the end.
The book is really more text. Hey Rachel, can I share my screen? Am I allowed?
You should be. Let me stop.
I haven't tried. All right, so don't laugh at my Zoom page because or my Canvas page because uh, some of this is because the Quality Matters reviewers wanted it. They kept telling me to put a start here button, so I finally just put a big start here button right there. I was like, quit telling me that. Um, but if you go in, so these are the different modules, right? And if you go to week 1, they'll open up a Canvas module. And so it starts off with like learning objectives and how those relate to the course objectives. And then there are these kinds of things. And so it's just, this is really just words, but then throw in some pictures. And this is stuff I wrote because I wanted to get that DAP part in there. But so this is all just like wordy, 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 but sometimes it's less wordy than that. Sometimes, and I'm sorry about that, dog. Sometimes
So can it exist beyond your LMS for other people like to use it?
that's a great question. And I would say the answer is yes, because that version that I made for, I thought I was going to show you one with more videos in it, but I didn't do it. The version I made to print can be a doc file or a PDF file of the whole thing. Does that make sense? For example, I have a student this semester who, she uses a screen reader, and so I was able to send the whole PDF of the book to get it, uh, the audio. So it's not going through. She's not going through the individual pages.
Thank you.
Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
So
So
we
I'm
have
still
about,
trying to.
oh, sorry.
This is so not multimedia looking, and I really wanted it to be. Oh, okay.
We have
So
about 6 or 7 minutes. If there's other questions, I actually had a little bit of a question for you.
Okay.
What do your students think of
Yeah.
this, and how did you involve them, or did you like tell them that, hey, I'm writing this book kind of as we're going, and
my students.
Yeah, I did.
were
Especially,
they graceful with you with a with you needing to correct things and have them up, and how is that relationship?
listen, man, the free part, it it gets you out of any concern. Okay. They love the free part. They think it's cool that their professor teaches out of their own book, They think that's neat. Some of them do, some of them don't care. But the free part, they all like that.
Yeah.
And so I also think they really, especially in the strategies for early learners class, because they are sort of developing into teachers, I think they really like that it's Tennessee specific.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's more individualized. I think that's kind of neat to them.
So that
But
customization is an important thing for them.
right. I mean, I think it makes them feel real. But listen, Phil, I'm really not even trying to be cute here. They love the free. Okay. It's and I guess I would have too as a student. I actually kind of made me, and I hate to say this, it kind of brought me out of my ivory tower a little bit because I thought they'd all want to keep my words of wisdom in a book that they could carry around in their backpacks and put on their shelves, but no, they just want to get through my class. And that's okay. That's great. But it was a reminder that of what it was like to be a student, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They never caught up with me. So they never had that experience, right? Of like, oh my gosh, we're a week behind. So I didn't get any negative reaction at all.
Suzanne asked in the chat about having the textbook to show as an example, and we should have that. I was hoping to have it live by the time we were giving this presentation, but forces have conspired against me. But we will have that up in UTC Scholar, our institutional repository, soon. I won't make any promises.
Oh,
And I
that
sent it
would be
back to the
great.
College of the Canyons, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so they got that.
And it is a really great example of how to do that citing adaptation. And you've got some Phil over at ETSU has a couple of adaptations in their repository as well.
Yeah, and actually, this is really great to see because we also worked with an early childhood educator, and same story you were explaining. There's not one single textbook that had everything they needed, and they ended up doing a similar kind of adaptation.
Oh, that's really cool.
Really more focused on like even STEM for
Right.
early childhood.
Right.
I
Just
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's kind of for Phil but Rachel and Daryl. I'm from MTSU, and last Friday I did. We're doing our OER grant. I did my first workshop on adapting and creating, but to date, I've never actually helped anyone adapt a textbook. So I was very excited to see this session today. And you seem very chill, Daryl, and I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of this, but I think everyone's a little frantic. Do I have to learn Pressbooks? Should we just do it in D2L, which is our LMS? There's an OER Commons thing, and they're like, what do I do to start writing? And I showed them that, you can just bust this out as a Word doc in most places and start there.
That's what I
Absolutely.
focus on. Absolutely. And
Okay.
DR will tell you, I tell all of my faculty who are working on anything from adoptions through, creating brand new books. I mean, you can't make a book without content. That's the most important thing. And that's where your skill set is as the faculty member. So we together throughout or later can focus on how we're gonna go back a slide, go from the harvest to the polished product, and make it look nice and something to share. But first you have to have the content. And that's actually how I structure my grants that include OER creation. I just do them the same as a course revision grant. So you finish making the content, I'll give you a little bit of money, but I'm not going to give you the rest of the money until we're able to finish and publish the product.
Your PowerPoints kind of make me hungry. And the metaphor that I have in my head now is like if you made like sweet tea or something, that's the important part, not the container that you pour it in. And so I use what's called LibreOffice, or it's just like a doc or like Word, but I don't use the Windows. And so that's the way I did the second one. I did it completely with just a doc file because I realized the easiest thing I could do was to do that, because I wanted people to be able to remix it later. I'd have that. I knew I would want it to be printed out through Amazon. I'd have that. And I knew that I could just print out as a PDF file each chapter to post up there. And honestly, I think I think the students are just as okay with that as they are with it embedded in the HTML. And what I'm about to say is going to sound snarky, but if you look at the kind of ebooks and stuff that come from McGraw-Hill or from Pearson and stuff, I think they're happy just to have a plain PDF and not have all that sort of bloated crap, that they can just look at wherever they're at. And I'm also surprised by the number that look at stuff on their phone. I mean,
Yeah, they'll read the entire text on the phone. I do want to be mindful of our time, but I'll also say, Suzanne, that some faculty that I've worked with that are doing the more adapting, creating, like Daryl's describing here, are also doing it kind of the week by week, almost like a week, lesson plan, kind of writing as they go, staying a few weeks ahead, and then kind of end of the semester, polishing it
I think
up more.
Yeah, that is a strategy. It's a strategy that helps you to survive. So yeah.
Right.
In
so.
hindsight, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I actually started the spring semester before that summer on the first one. But I had a textbook that they were using, and I was starting things as we went each chapter. And so that was back in the days when we had class in real life. And so like if I'd go and teach that class, then I'd work on it. So I had kind of a skeleton going into the summer.
So I know we're over time, but I just wanted to give you a chance to offer any encouragement or kind of your vision for the future of what you would like to see happen, or what you're going to be working on in the future, or what you would say to encourage folks
Right.
who are working on adoptions or
Listen,
adaptations.
it's and I'll tell you this too. I counted it as we have annual evaluations. I counted this as scholarship because that's what it is. It's writing. It's a lot of work, um, and so there was some value in it there too. So it wasn't just the time that was going into one class. I was using it in multiple ways. Uh, I'd encourage you all to do this because it was I don't know a better word. It was an intellectually stimulating thing to do. It was fun. It got me in touch with the class that I had taught a lot, um, and it got me to see it in some fresh new ways. It added a lot of excitement to me, and so I think when you're having fun, the students are probably having more fun too. So I really strongly encourage you to do this. It is a fun, neat kind of process. And I'm happy to, if anybody wants to send me an email at UTC, I'm happy to try to help any way that I can. I just think it's cool that we live in a world where we have this kind of technology now, and it's just super fun. And what would I like to see in the future, Rachel? Well, I've kind of mentioned this. I've got we have about 3 classes in our education department that are sort of before the junior year that students may take at community colleges, and I would love if we could have sort of like sort of like they do in California. They have this community college set of books, that we could have that set of books that we could use, so that when the students, when they came in, they would have the same it had the same resource and same background. I think that would be really cool. So that's one hope that I have.
Well,
Well, this
thank
has been
you.
a great session, and thank you both so much. It was wonderful to hear your experiences. And for anyone still on the call, there is a link to an evaluation form for this session, if you're so inclined. And we will be sharing out the slides and recording. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. It's
Thank
always
you
a
all.
pleasure to talk with you about OER.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's making me want to get my garden out. So
I know. I gotta get Lowe's to deliver me some
I
blocks because I was gonna build a thing and put a
had a
garden in it.
lovely time on the desk one day finding all of those photos to use.
nice.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to be sharing this book, especially, and your vision is the same as mine when I think about early childhood and those kinds of classes that are throughout the state and throughout the community colleges and all the other universities, especially the ones that are Tennessee focused. There's no reason for us to not
Do
be
you
sharing
know
all our work
about
together.
Right.
the early childhood STEM lab at ATSU? I'll pop the link in here for you.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Alyssa Lang is the faculty here that we worked with, who was kind of the lead on that.
Cool.
Well, send them my strategies for early learners.
Yeah, I
Book
I know that.
I will definitely share that out with the
If this had been like a year or two ago, she probably would have used your book, but I think they ended up doing.
Well, it's a Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It really is like, here's something from Australia, here's something from California, but It's kind of fun too, right? And you talked about Jennifer Paris, Rachel. When I first did that child
Mhm.
development book, she was excited because I was the first person that ever remixed their book, and so she
Yeah.
thought that was just,
Yeah.
so
I just
it's neat,
more and more, right? So it's like just this whole
right?
when we were planning, I talked about because I had these gardening slides. So we talked about working the soil and making it more fertile. So that's the hope.
Right. Right. Well, it's cool that people share and want to share. All right. I know that
Right.
y'all have to
I
go,
have
and I
another meeting,
appreciate
so
your
I got to
time.
go. Thanks again. Thanks, Phil, for moderating.
No problem.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
to Kesha and Vanessa. See you later.
Thank you.